Studies here at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, and I am delighted to welcome you to the center today and to this discussion of the findings from the Gender and Multicultural Leadership Survey. Some of you are new to the center. Let me take one brief moment just to tell you that the center was created by Congress in 1968 as the living memorial to Woodrow Wilson. Some of you may know that Woodrow Wilson remains the only American president to have earned a PhD. He was a leading political scientist, very appropriate for this program, as well as president of Princeton University before he decided to turn to the world of politics. So Congress, in its great wisdom, decided not to put up another marble building on the Mall, but instead to create a living monument, one that would bring together the two sides of Wilson's professional life, the policymaking side and the scholarly side. And that's what the center does. The center tries to bring together scholars and policymakers to talk about matters that are of importance to both. Surely, no matter could be more important than the question of who leads this country, who helps to make the decisions for this country, and how inclusive is that leadership? What does the fact of inclusivity do for the leadership and for the rest of us who live in this country? And we're going to be addressing some of those questions and getting some answers today. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Professor Christine Sierra from the University of New Mexico, who will start off the proceedings. Thank you.
Good afternoon. We are delighted to be here today. And let me begin by first introducing my co-principal investigators on this project. Let me introduce them briefly, and I will just also mention that we have a biographical sheet if you want to know any more details on us. To my immediate left is Professor Dianne Pinderhughes from the University of Notre Dame, Carol Hardy-Fanta from the University of Massachusetts, Boston, and Peta Lin from the University of California at Santa Barbara, all of us political scientists engaged in this multi-year study. Let me also issue special thanks to Dr. Philippa Strum, the director of the Division of United States Studies here at the Woodrow Wilson Center, and also acknowledge Susan Nugent and Acacia Reed, Susan being the program assistant and Acacia Reed being the program associate. They have been very, very helpful in helping us to set up this event. I also want to acknowledge that this project was made possible with a generous grant from the Ford Foundation, and we are very pleased for that support. I also want to acknowledge two of our very important members of this team, the ones who help us with the nitty-gritty of data analysis and a number of other things. Dr. Lori Frazier from the University of California, Los Angeles, and Paige Ransford from the University of Massachusetts, Boston. They are here with us today. Those who are a little bit afar from here, but nevertheless very valuable as graduate assistants, are Lisa Bryant and Ron Nakura from the University of New Mexico, and we also issue an acknowledgement and special thanks to Rose Hessmiller from Albuquerque, New Mexico, who is our webmaster and has produced our website. Let me mention that I also want to indicate that after we have invited a couple of special guests who are very appropriate to be with us today, and that is some elected officials, women of color, who have joined us for this event. We are going to ask them, invite them to say a few words after our presentation, but I would briefly like to acknowledge their presence here today. Nancy Navarro is the Montgomery County Public Schools Board member. Nancy, would you stand, please? Go ahead and clap, please. And Valerie Ervin, Montgomery County Council member, is also with us. let me mention that we should have plenty of time for questions and answers after our presentation, so please hold those till we get done with our presentation. And I don't remember if Dr. Strum has mentioned to turn off his cell phones, but we would appreciate that, and sometimes we forget about doing things like that. Well, let me begin by acknowledging or mentioning, underscoring that demographic change in the American population is changing the face of America. There is indeed a new millennium with an emergent and newly emergent leadership. That newly emergent leadership is people of color, and our study addresses their particular presence in American politics and their changing of the political landscape. Our multi-year project involves the construction of a national database of elected officials of color by race and gender. And our database contains over 10,000 elected officials of color in selected offices at the federal, state, and local level. A major component that we will talk to you today about is our telephone survey of a sample of those elected officials of color. We also are preparing an annotated bibliography to be posted on our website, as well as providing in our research an analytical framework to study intersectionality, the intersection of gender, race, ethnicity, and class. And finally, we are also very proud to reveal our interactive project website at gmcl.org. And we believe that that will be very helpful to you, both as scholars and just people who are interested in politics and in what our project brings to the table. What offices do elected officials of color hold? Our database contains 90% of our database are are officials of color who serve at local levels of office. 10% are county commissioners, 48% are municipal officials, 32% serve on local school boards. Also in our database are 9% are state legislators. We also have our members of Congress that are included in that database. Let's think for a moment of where they are in their geographical distribution. This represents a map of the distribution of black elected officials across the country. As you can see by the color, the reddish and colors in the slide, the black elected officials are concentrated in states in the South, but they are also more dispersed across the country, more dispersed than any of the other groups in our study. And there are only 3 states that we believe have no black elected officials currently serving in office. A different geographical distribution pattern is apparent with Latinos in elected office. Hispanic elected officials are concentrated in states of the Southwest, the Northeast, and certainly the Southeast and Florida, and that reflects the concentrations of the general Latino population. And there are Latino elected officials that are slowly emerging in other areas of the country, but we still have patterns of geographic concentration that have been long-standing in American politics. Asians have yet another pattern of distribution. About 75% of Asian and Pacific Islanders in elected office are found in the states of California and Hawaii. And there are a few that also appear in other states, but they really have a high rate of concentration in 2 states. We are very proud to talk to you today about the survey component of our study. The Gender Multicultural Leadership Survey is to date the nation's most comprehensive multiracial, multi-office national survey of Black, Latino, Asian, and American Indian elected officials in positions at the state and local level. Now I'd like to invite my colleague Dianne Pinderhughes to address a number of other questions about the survey.
We wanted to share with you reasons why we concentrate on particular areas of the survey. We begin with the focus on state and local government. Why focus at that level? State and local governments are laboratories of democracy. They're the areas where a great deal of activity is taking place. We have the devolution of, or let me say that it's where policymaking occurs, where policy experimentation is occurring, and in many cases where we see the beginnings, where people have the opportunity to begin their political careers in politics and government. We also see, particularly in the last 15 to 20 years, the devolution of responsibilities from the federal government to state and local jurisdictions, with the national government passing down responsibilities on in a variety of areas. They're asking state and local governments to implement policies, to take major responsibility for them, including things like welfare reform. That there is just recently the failure of the federal government to pass a national immigration policy means that a number of state and local governments are jumping up and beginning to pass legislation. It may be controversial, but nevertheless, they're having to begin to deal with that. There's also the problem of health care reform, the costs associated with health care that is part of state and local government responsibilities. And then finally, little less is known about elected officials of color in these areas. The scholarly community is, we argue, just beginning to study these groups, particularly at the local and state level. Okay. Another slide on this question. We need to understand the variety of contexts within which they serve. And these photos, which we uncovered in our years of work on this, gives you a sense of the range of responsibility in the areas in which people function. The photo on the left is the town hall in Duncan, Mississippi. You can see it's a very, very small town hall. We were kind of spent a lot of time exclaiming over how small a space it was. On the right, the Massachusetts State House, a very different space in which public officials are functioning, and which now is, led by an African American governor. We also wanted to take note of the fact that state and local governments, state and local officials have particular kinds of problems. This photo I'm very proud of because it was one that one had to go to the source to get it. It's the recent representation of matters in Tallahatchie County, Mississippi, where new black elected officials at the county level and in the local office, local town. Tutwiler, Mississippi Mayor Robert Grayson is on the left, the immediate left there in the white shirt, and the Tallahatchie County Supervisor Jerome Little is in a suit facing the plaque that they placed on the Tallahatchie County courthouse lawn, taking note of the fact that the murder of Emmett Till occurred, the trial occurred. This just happened within the last month, October 3rd. This picture and the article were reported in the Chicago Tribune. And the officials involved are African American. They wanted to take note of the fact that this was something that was important. I thought it symbolized the changes in the African American, in the representation of politics in that local community, and was symbolic of the changes we're trying to address. Who is in the survey? This gives you a graph of the survey respondents. We've been talking to some extent about the database. Now we're moving to the survey itself. A total of 1,354. You can see that the color distribution. Most are black. Latinas are 38%. Asians 7%. American Indians 2%. More than 1/3 of the survey are women, and as we've already said, 90% are local officials. We found that the data showed that there's a good bit of information in our survey that challenges the stereotypes we have of the groups, but also of elected officials representing the specific groups in question. The groups are highly educated, 58%. You can see that 58% have college degrees, 30% have graduate degrees. They're very qualified to be in public office. These are people who have, in many cases, have parents who've less than a high school diploma, but they themselves were able to finish high school, go to college, and even get graduate degrees. In many instances, the assumption on the part of popular assumptions, I think in the broader national population, are that minority groups don't necessarily respect, value education. They don't necessarily work very hard to get ahead. Our data shows that these individuals, significant portions of our survey group, have in fact been very effective in moving into the educational system. They also challenge convention in the sense that the literature of elected officials primarily, which is based primarily on the larger average at the national level, which is largely about white males, is those individuals typically are in business, they're typically in law. We know, in fact, most of us who teach our departments of political science are quite large because we always have such a large group of people who are going to law school and they feel that political science is the path to law and the path to public office and political life. The respondents in our survey, 25%, the largest proportion, 25% have an occupation, a current occupation in education. Another 9% are in community and social services, 8% are in business, and by contrast to the different population groups, 5% are lawyers. I think that the last slide I'm going to talk about is one of our surprising findings. We were working on social issues, sociodemographic patterns in the population, and we're curious as to what the data would show about the status, the marital status of our group. And you can see that this is one of the most disparate results, meaning large differences between one of the groups we're studying. 80% of the men are married in our group. 53% of women are married in our group. Why? Well, we know from the literature and also from our own speculation that marriage operates differently for women elected officials than for men. If married, and I see our officials are present who are shaking their heads in the front row. If married, they are neglecting their family. If never married, they could not get a man. If divorced, they could not keep him. This is a quote from an observer of public life. Among African Americans, there's a 30% gender gap in the marital data. 88% of Asian men are married compared to 70% for women, and 84% of Latino elected officials are married who are male, and 64% of Latinas are married. I think I'm going to hand off to my colleague, Carol Hardy-Fanta.
Hello there. We're very excited to be here today, and I'm just going to continue with some of the information that Dianne started with in terms of who are the elected officials that we surveyed. And as the slide shows, 76% are Democrats, 8% are Republicans, and 10% are independents. So that sort of confirms a little bit of the perspective that quote, minority people and minority officials are likely to be Democrats. However, are they liberal or conservative? Well, it turns out they're middle of the road. That 32%, a third, said they're liberal. Another third said they're middle of the road, and 29% said they're conservative. So it's interesting that you can't just rely on party affiliation as they're registered because they may actually represent different perspectives even though their affiliations are as predicted. And who do they represent? 2/3 say the majority of voters in their jurisdictions are middle of the road or somewhat conservative. So I think you can't take for granted the idea that the parties political parties can just sort of write off certain groups because they're Democrat. We actually want to point this out, that there are some interests, some affiliations beyond ideology, beyond the party affiliation. Now, one of the things that we were very interested in our study to explore, because it's really new ground, the prior experiences of elected officials before they got into office. It's traditionally called the paths to political office or political trajectories. But we like to think that it's really an exploration of what they've done before, and that there is no single path to political office for elected officials of color. There are multiple paths. People come from different kinds of experience. They emerge in different ways. And if you look at this slide, as you see that these are the kinds of prior civic engagement that the elected officials reported. Community and neighborhood rates at the top in terms of being involved in a community or neighborhood organization. The mean level on a scale of 0 to 10 was 7.3. PTAs and PTOs is very high also. Clearly, the elected officials are very involved in the PTAs and PTOs before they run for office the very first time. And the women of color are particularly involved in PTAs and PTOs, not unexpectedly. There was a mean of almost 7 for the women compared to about 6 for the men. Not surprisingly, women are heavily involved in women's organizations. The mean was 3.5 for the whole group, but it's a 5.6 for women and just 2.2 for men. Blacks have the highest level of involvement in all of the different kinds of activities in our study, and compared to other races. And that civil rights, while it's sort of 5th or so down here on the in the overall means, it's actually 2nd for blacks. So the involvement in civil rights organizations is very high for blacks. Also, faith-based was a 6.5 mean on a scale of 0 to 10. Now, I get to do the fun part of this study, this report today, of why the elected officials say they ran for office the first time. And I really do want to acknowledge Paige Ransford from the University of Massachusetts, my colleague, who did the coding with several other folks in a blind coding of the qualitative answers, the real words that people used when they said why they ran. They were asked, why did you run for office the very first time? They would answer, did you have another reason? Did you have another reason? We coded these for all of these elected officials. And turns out that the two big reasons were issues and community. And on the issues, 50% of the elected officials said they were running because of an issue they cared about, wanted to do something about, or that they mentioned as important to them. And I'm just giving you 2 examples here. A Latino male mayor from California said there was no toilet in the park. Another one that we always like was we wanted to build a viaduct. An Asian male senator, state senator from Hawaii, said to help small businesses. So those were sort of very concrete issues that they cared about. Others were education, and we'll go into that in a little bit. The other equally important reason was for the community. Now, the community meant either that they came from community, that they had wanted to provide a community service, or that they were interested in community, wanted to give back to the community. And two of the quotes we have here is a black female county board member from Louisiana who said, "My community has done a lot for me. I felt the need to give back to my community." An Asian female school board member from California said, "I felt this was a good way to do community service. To run for office meant that she was doing a community service for a service to the community." Another area that often is mentioned in the literature on what women need in order to run for office. A lot has been put out there lately that women need to be asked, that they need to be encouraged to run. Well, we actually found that in our sample of men and women elected officials, only 16% said they were encouraged to run either by family or parties or anybody. This Latino school board member from Texas said, "I was asked to represent the parents and children who could not voice their concerns." We coded that as encouraged to run. But that was a lower than issue or community. Personal ambition, and usually that's in terms of their own, what they're going to gain out of, that they run for their own selves or that they want to get into higher office, something like that, only rates 2% of the respondents. However, a black female city councilor from South Carolina said, "I felt I was qualified. I felt I could bring a lot to the table if given that opportunity." Now I'm going to turn to another theme that we explored in great detail in our study. And I want to let you know that a lot of information about certain policy issues and issues of concern to elected officials are going to be posted on our website, gmcl.org, by this afternoon. But what we found in what the elected officials had to say about what were the most important issues, we found that there are voices of diversity, but also common ground. We found more commonality in many cases than differences. The most important issues facing constituents, for the perspective of these elected officials, 46 said the most important issue facing their constituents was education. And again, if you can recollect back to what was said earlier, that this is a group that highly values education, the number one issue for these people from their communities was education. The second most important, with 32%, was employment and wages. About 20 to 21% talked about public safety, development, health care, and a little bit below that were things like housing. And for blacks, the top issue was a little bit different. There were some racial differences. For blacks, employment and wages was the top, and it was at 39% and 24% for Latinos and 17% for Asians. For education, there was the racial difference in that 57% of the Asian elected officials, 48% of the Latinos, and 43% of the blacks said that education was the top. So you did see some racial differences there. Going on to the voices of diversity in terms of findings on selected policy positions. We're going to talk today just on 4. We have a wide number of other policy positions in the study, including affirmative action, voting rights, just a very wide range. One of the interesting findings, for example, from the voting rights was that virtually all of the elected officials of color come from jurisdictions that are covered by the Voting Rights Act. So if anyone has any question about the impact of the Voting Rights Act, one can look at this group and say that it has had a huge impact, that virtually all have come from areas covered by the Voting Rights Act. But I'm going to talk first about women's issues and then turn it over to Dianne. Oops. Oh, dear. I didn't change the slide organization. Oops, there. We'll have a little glitch there. In terms of women's issues, there are, in fact, no gender differences, no gender gap on certain key issues. 81% of all the elected officials agreed that the government should provide more child care services. 86% favored increasing subsidized child care slots in welfare to work programs. And 90% support laws against sexual harassment and job discrimination against women. Now, we wanted to start with this slide because we want to make sure that people understand that we consider women's issues to be very important and that they are not only about reproductive rights. So these are very important issues in which there's very great commonality across the sexes in support of these government policies that benefit women or that affect women. However, we don't want to ignore the reproductive rights issue. It turns out that 79% of all male and female elected officials support abortion rights in terms of the right to have an abortion if in the case of either unconditionally or in the case of rape, incest, or to protect the life of the woman. However, there were some gender differences in terms of Roe versus Wade. 84% of the women disagreed or strongly disagreed with the overturning of Roe v. Wade, and compared to 76% of the men. So women across the board were most strongly in favor of sustaining Roe v. Wade. Now I'd like to turn it over to Dianne, Professor Dianne from the University of Santa Barbara, and I'm going to have to repeat a couple slides. I'm going to put it back to the Iraq War, and then you're going to have to skip those women's slides. So thank you very much.
Okay, I get to have the pleasure of addressing some hot-button issues such as the war in Iraq. One of the things we would like to highlight again is the consensus across the diverse communities here. We are talking about multiracial communities here, but you can see that 3 out of 4 of the elected officials of color, both men and women, think the U.S. made the wrong decision in using military force against Iraq. The other question we ask is about what do they think of whether U.S. should bring troops home soon as possible. As you can see, even a higher percentage of the people that we surveyed believe so. So this is a very important finding when we try to talk about the communities here of all the multiple origins. And the other thing Go
ahead.
I think we have more than... I think we have more than...
One more. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay, one more is down there.
There
I see. Okay, all right. We do want to emphasize that even though there's a lot of consensus, but there's also something about a unique role of race and gender. For instance, we find out African American elected officials, they would voice the strongest dissatisfaction against the decision to go to war in Iraq. And we also see that among men and women, there's a gender gap, there's a 10-point, not that huge, but there's substantial or statistically significant enough the gender gap that women will show stronger support of the decision, but also stronger disapproval. Stronger disapproval of the decision on Iraq, but also the stronger support for an early withdrawal, and then gender gaps widest among Asians, between Asian men and women, but narrowest among blacks. Okay, that's on the Iraqi war. I also would like to say a little bit about the elephant in the room, the voting rights issues there, which is actually a minority issue, that one of the many issues that we cannot cover. Basically, I just want to say that given the importance of voting rights to our elected officials, we should not be surprised. There's 9 out of 10 of them would say that the U.S. government should reauthorize the Voting Rights Act, and we also asked them our opinions on sending federal observers to the jurisdictions, and as well as the Section 5 preclearance issues. There we basically see again a very high consensus across all the groups there, even if there are also some racial differences. And here, being an Asian American, I would say that Asian American happen to be of a slightly lower level of support. But if we look at the distribution pattern, still 3 out of 4 of them, even with the weakest support of the group, 3 out of them are actually also in support of different provisions of the Voting Rights Act. And I thought that's important to mention. And the other hot button issue is on immigration. Here, we asked 4 questions on immigration. We asked them, for instance, here is whether or not we should provide government services in a variety of languages to help non-English speaking clients. You see that 8 out of 10 basically say yes. And also, I'm happy to report that there's virtually no racial gaps in terms of the EO, elected officials of color's opinion in terms of this issue. And going to next question on immigration, we find mixed opinion in terms of providing driver's licenses for immigrants regardless of their status. Okay, and that is certainly something very controversial, and we find some racial differences in there, but basically it's close to half of them in general would actually say that yes, and of course the highest level of support being among Latinos. And then the other question we ask is whether or not the government should provide instructions in languages other than English in public schools. And here we find 7 out of 10 elected officials in general also would support this policy position, and there's very little racial differences here, even if we do find slightly lower level of support among Asian Americans, and we kind of try to figure out why, and my personal interpretation is that perhaps Asian Americans being having a more likely tendency to be from a foreign-born background, they probably are very much interested in trying to get integrated and acculturated into the community. Therefore, they believe learning English is more important than trying to keep the languages, the ethnic language itself. Okay, and then we also have another one. It's on whether or not we should provide non-citizens who have children, parents of non-citizen parents who have children attending public school, whether or not they should get to be able to vote in local elections. Here you see that, I should report it, basically in general, near majority of them, we are talking about 47% across all the groups. There's no racial gaps there. They would say that they would like to see this provision becomes a legislation. However, we do see some significant gender gaps here. You see that women are more likely than men of color elected officials to support this proposition on immigration. Okay, and finally, we talk about the No Child Left Behind Act. Here, reflecting the U.S. public opinion, elected officials of color are evenly divided on this issue, and a position among teachers, those who are either currently or prior to their holding a full-time elected position, they are they either primary or secondary school teachers. That's what we call them, the teachers here. 65% of them would be opposing to the No Child Left Behind Act. And we also notice just across different levels of offices, state legislators tend to express the strongest position. 7 out of 10 of them would oppose to this act. Okay, and then we also, another finding is that there is stronger opposition among Asians to the No Child Left Behind Act compared to blacks or Latinos. So we do see some racial gaps, but not very huge. Okay, finally, we would also like to report that there are gender gaps in this, toward this policy as well. We see that there are lower support toward the No Child Left Behind Act among women, compared to men. Okay, again, the gender gap 9 point is not very huge, but they are certainly statistically significant. Okay, I would like to close by sending a special thank you to the Ford Foundation who funded our survey. We also like to thank the Woodrow Wilson International Center Scholars, as well as our data providers of the different, basically the different database that directory we use to construct the database. And we would like to share with you the very exciting information that we report here. And we actually just report the tip of the iceberg. And you can find out more in our website. And let me see. I think it should work. Okay. We're going to introducing our website. We have been updating it. So here you can actually see more. We have, just look at the components of the website. We do have who we are, the principal investigators. Okay, and then we also have the national database here of the non-white elected officials. And look, this is the interactive map. So here, this is the map that actually shows the distribution that we share with you in terms of the different racial groups. Okay, this is something that you see. Then we also have something on the reading room. We have materials there on publications and papers, voting rights, changing guard, APSA papers, and a number of things. One of the most recent publication is this one, Gender, Race, and Descriptive Representation in the United States, Foundings from the Gender and Racial Multicultural Leadership Project. Okay, so we have a number of things. If you haven't visited our website, you probably need to spend a lot of time on. We also would like to share with you the survey. Here, we also have something to share with you. Top line findings. This actually would include the questionnaire as well as the distribution. And we hope it works. It does. Okay. All right. It also have a description of the survey methodology in here. Basically, it's a long 54 some pages of documents. And then we also have executive summary, which we have in hand, as well as fact sheets. The policy report that we are sharing with you are only a fraction of our findings. And you'll see the fact sheets, a number of the fact sheets on women's issues. I don't think it works.
Can you go back to the home and show?
Yes, I will. Okay, on the policy position. So I'm just telling you that I think by the end of the day, you should be able to see them. I know they are very fancy fact sheet. I do want to go to the home page because there's something very, okay, go to the home page. There's something most fanciful work. It's actually here, interactive map. Okay, elected officials color in the U.S. and by state. So by clicking on the map here, we're going to see, first of all, a national distribution. Okay, we have some numbers here. All right, look at these federal elected officials of color. Looking at here, we have a total of 75 of them, and you can see their racial and gender. Actually, the gender will be here. This will be their gender breakdown by race. Okay. Then we also have something on the tab. The other tab, the middle tab, actually shows you. This is at the national level. You see that we have different level of officers serving at the subnational level, and so we have governors, state legislators, county officials, municipal officers, school board officials. Basically, these are kind of very much correlate with what we use in the database, but we did have some update at the congressional level. Okay. Then we also want to show you looking at, this is the most, I think this takes a lot of time to construct this, and I really want to thank Christine Sierra and her team of researchers that help us with this data. I'm just clicking at Illinois. Dianne Pinderhughes used to be her former home state, and we can see that here, again, we have similar federal distributions, and we have the state and local distributions, okay, by race, by level of office, and then we also have elected officials of color by gender. Again, this is on that one state, and we have all 50 states. There's something important to know. Okay, now in order to accept whether or not we have something called parity in descriptive representation, we have to understand the population base they are elected from. And here is actually that link on each of the states. And here's an example of the state of Illinois. What's the percentage of the people in that state that are by their racial origin? And we see that the biggest bar here is actually non-Hispanic white, but we also see 14.3% of Hispanic. We also see 15.6% of African American, for example. So this is a lot of data in our gmcl.org database, that the website that we spend a lot of time. I guess how many years? I don't even know how to count, but we definitely are very honored to have this opportunity today, actually, to launch this in an official ways with you. Thank you. Just close it.
Can we go back? Can we put it back on the home page?
Okay. Close the tab here. Okay. Yeah. Yes, we can close this. Home page. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Maybe just the front.
I know. Yeah. You want to go to the home page? Okay.
The title that we've been using for our project is the Gender Multicultural Leadership Project, the Future of Governance. But the future of governance is now. And two of the elected officials who represent multicultural leadership in this 21st century are with us, and we are delighted that they could join us, and we invite them to make a few remarks. Valerie Ervin is Montgomery County Council member. She is the first African American woman to serve on that body. She previously was elected in 2004 to be the second African American female member of the Montgomery County Board of Education. Council member Ervin has been a long and active advocate for public education in Montgomery County. She has been involved in numerous PTSA activities. She has also been involved, for example, in the Blacks United for Excellence in Education and the Montgomery County Education Forum. She earned a BA in Labor Studies and went on for MPA from the University of Baltimore. I was very impressed that not only did she get a BA at the National Labor College in Silver Spring, Maryland, but she also became Dean of Students at the National Labor College in Silver Spring, Maryland. So I would like to invite Councilmember Ervin up to the stage to join us and tell us a little bit about herself and what might have resonated with her with the materials that we have presented today.
Good afternoon. So much resonated with me in the materials that you presented this afternoon, but let me say good afternoon and thank you very much for the invitation. I asked Nancy Navarro, who's here also, who will make a presentation in a second, to come up with me because my political career is very closely tied to hers, and we tend to do a lot of presentations together, so what I have to say is going to involve her a lot. So not like a lot of the men who are elected. We'll have to say when I'm asked to do something, I do follow the instructions. And I was told to talk about my paths to reaching public office, and I'm going to make this as succinct as I can. I didn't time it, but it should be 2 minutes or less. My name is Valerie Ervin, and I'm a member of the Montgomery County Council. Montgomery County, Maryland is a suburb of Washington, D.C. It has a reputation for being an affluent and highly educated community. It is a county with almost 1 million residents. Montgomery County has been experiencing, however, a dramatic cultural and socioeconomic shift, and it's struggling with its new identity. I am the first and only African American woman on the council. I guess I'll begin my story here. I was always interested in politics. I was on the student council in my junior high school, and in high school I was also a member of the Student Senate. I ran for the Student Senate at the University of New Mexico, where I attended college and served for 2 terms. While a student at the university, I became pregnant with my first son. I quit school and began to work full-time checking groceries at a nearby Safeway supermarket. I joined the union and followed in the footsteps of my mother, who was a union activist. Over a 10-year span of time, I worked at Safeway, and I became more and more active in the union. I became a shop steward and was hired by the United Food and Commercial Workers Union as a union representative for grocery store workers all over the state of New Mexico. My union roots took me from Albuquerque to Washington, D.C. in 1987. I relocated here to work for the United Food and Commercial Workers International Union to work as the assistant director of the Women's Affairs Department. It wasn't long before I ended up assisting on organizing campaigns that took me from my office in Washington, D.C. to organizing catfish workers in the Mississippi Delta, to organizing poultry workers in North Carolina, to nursing home workers in South Carolina, to organizing hospital workers in Rhode Island. It was a time of great awakening for me. I didn't know that here in America people were starving, that in America many of the women workers I met couldn't read or write. It occurred to me that I could do so much more, and I could use my voice to tell their stories. The most powerful lessons that I've learned in my life so far came from my time spent with women workers all over America. I left the labor movement 5 years ago to work as the chief of staff to a Montgomery County Council member. During that time, I ran for the Board of Education and met someone who has become a very important person in my life, and she is here today, and her name is Nancy Navarro. Together, we served on the Board of Education, and she is now the president of that board. Those 2 years that we served together were the most difficult, but in some ways the most rewarding time that I have spent as an elected official and as an advocate for the needs of poor, minority, and immigrant children. I learned that sometimes it is worth the pain and the difficulty of being seen as out of step with the majority on issues that impact those who have no voice. This work is not easy, and there are no roadmaps. And I'm going to end there because before Nancy comes up, I want to say that this has been the most interesting session that I've sat through for a while. And on the back of my piece of paper, I wrote down a couple of things. And that one that was most interesting to me is who serves, who gets to serve. And I believe that there are many gatekeepers that prevent more women of color from engaging in the political process as elected officials. And one of those gatekeepers, I talk about this a lot, is that the way our county code in Montgomery County was written was that if you get elected to the Montgomery County Council, it's a full-time job, but it's paid on a part-time salary basis. I am not a woman of means, and it is very difficult to serve my community in this capacity when I have to figure out how I'm going to pay my son's way through college and make my mortgage payments. This was done many, many, many years ago because, as you know, landowners were the ones who got to serve in an elected office and not people who look like me. So I'm in a struggle on a daily basis trying to get people to understand the way you break open the doors is that you make it fair for people who are not white men of means to serve. I just wanted to put that out there because it sounds to me that you asked that question. And the other thing is the assumption that most people in elected office are lawyers. Mm-hmm. And so the assumption is always, oh, where'd you go to law school? I didn't actually get my MPA until 6 years ago. So I went back to school after I had 2 children and got my degree. And then I went back to school immediately and got my MPA. And so I'm like many women who waited to go to college. And so I feel like I serve my community well on many fronts. And I'm really happy to be here. I'm sure there'll be some interesting questions that we can engage in some conversation later. But I really wanted to share this very important time with you all. And I think my office sent out a press release. Mm-hmm. And we wanted people to know and to go to your website and to look at this, what we think is very important information. Thank you.
Nancy Navarro is Montgomery County Public Schools Board member. She was born in Caracas, Venezuela, and in 1987 she graduated from the University of Missouri in Columbia with a degree in psychology. Ms. Navarro was elected to her first full term on the Board of Education in November of 2006. And she also currently chairs the board's Communications and Public Engagement Committee. I think also reflecting the story of a number of the women in our study, Ms. Navarro co-founded a very important nonprofit community-based organization, Centro Familia, to serve Latinos and other immigrant communities in the county. She has taken on also a number of other community leadership activities and roles and has been recognized for her work. Just for example, the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce of Montgomery County presented her with the Leadership Award, and the Maryland State Department of Education also recognized her many achievements. So I welcome to the podium Nancy Navarro.
Hello, and thank you very much for this invitation as well. It's been truly a treat to be able to go through and listen to some of these findings and find yourself reflected I was not one of the participants in the survey, and it's wonderful to realize that there are more commonalities and so many themes that for a long time, Valerie and I always talk about the fact that if we didn't know each other, we would think we were crazy, and so we keep each other sane through this entire journey. So let me start by saying that, yes, I was born in Caracas, Venezuela. I had the opportunity to come to the United States when I was 10 years old. And learned English then. My father did some graduate work at the University of Missouri, Rolla, School of Mines, of course. Venezuela is an oil-producing country, so that's what he was doing. And we lived there for 2 years. And then I decided I really wanted to come back to the United States for college. I was the oldest in the family, very non-traditional family as a girl. My dad was very supportive of me taking off to this big country in the United States. So that was very non-traditional. But I came to the United States at age 17 and met my husband actually in Washington, D.C. as I was visiting some friends. He's actually from Haiti, but a U.S. citizen. And that sort of changed my plans in the sense that I then all of a sudden found myself, contemplating a life here in this amazing country. We moved to Montgomery County, had our first daughter, and out of that experience really began to pay attention, very close attention to what it meant to be a Latino woman, an immigrant woman, married to an immigrant man from Haiti, having children that were Afro-Latino children. What did that mean? How do I raise them? A whole new set of realities that were very different from my own experience as a Venezuelan. And so that was really the motivation to begin to pay attention to a lot of issues, specifically the issues around education. And that led to PTA participation, but also led to a desire to look into how I could and somehow contribute to the whole issue of school readiness, looking at family child care, looking at unregulated care, the first 5 years being so important. That led to the creation of Centro Familia. But then after almost 9 years of working in an environment in Montgomery County where at that time the word poverty also would not be uttered. When I reached out to different government agencies, the response I found was, wait a second, but we don't have those issues. And I kept saying, oh my God, but it's really a crisis. And we're talking 1998. So anyhow, that experience was very interesting. I had to make a decision early on that I would take on any barrier that came my way to really try to enhance those services, understanding that the achievement gap really started in the first 5 years. But in 2004, I felt that it was time for me to transition. And lo and behold, the school board member of my district resigned. And it was funny to see why people run. I was cornered because for the first time ever decided to support a candidate for school board, and that was Valerie Ervin. I had never been involved in political fundraising or anything like that, and I was cornered, and I was told, you got to do this. This is in your district. And, it was very strange because I had never really thought about it, but when I look back at my trajectory, I realized that somehow, without really understanding it or realizing it, I was preparing myself for that exact moment. And it was almost like magical in some ways. Everything just really fell into place, and I was appointed against all odds. So much so that the board president then said after the votes were in, what an interesting turn of events. Of course, somebody had already been sort of anointed, and I came in, and nobody knew where I came from. But it was so important, and those 2 years truly solidified for me why it is that we do need to have leadership that reflects the community. It's not that one particular person of a particular community cannot advocate on issues that affects everybody, but it has a lot to do with the importance of looking around and seeing who we are and truly being able to understand on a very organic level what our issues are. I ran for the board in 2006 and was elected. I'm now president of the board, and it has been really fascinating. Montgomery County is a microcosm of the country. And what I'm seeing, the things that are happening there are both painful and exciting. And I go through the daily struggles that were reflected here about, being a married a woman in politics and having a 15-year-old daughter and a 10-year-old daughter, and every day asking myself, am I really doing the right thing, and struggling with that. But also understanding that it is not about an ego situation. It is about truly having the opportunity to articulate issues and to offer perspectives that are more and more and more reflective of the majority of our population. Very quickly, Montgomery County Public Schools has 137,000 students. There are about 59% of those students are children of color, so either Latino, Asian, or African American. So it is the majority minority school system. That wasn't the case 15 years ago. And so it's really a privilege and an honor to serve. So thank you very much for this amazing opportunity and this roadmap. Trust me, it's going to be extremely useful for many people that would want to venture into this world. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for sharing your story with us. We will now open up the forum for questions and answers, and any comments or questions that you have. Please go ahead. I will try to call on people, and this woman. Oh, we have mics that so everybody can hear the question. Whoops.
Try again. How did you select the people you interviewed? Was it random or what?
Well, we had created the database, which is the population of elected officials and the categories that we considered to be possible to include in our study, which included state legislators, city councilors, town councilors, members of boards of selectmen, whatever their names are, the way they're called in any different jurisdiction, county commissioners and county supervisors, and local school board officials. And then what we did was we contracted with the Institute of Public Policy, University of New Mexico, to institute a random calling system from the database. In fact, getting through speaking of gatekeepers, it's sometimes hard to get through all the gatekeepers, but 72% of the people that we were successfully able to reach did respond to our survey. Anyone want to add anything else?
Another question? Yes, Dr. Morris?
Thank you. And thank you for the study. I have the impression, looking at a lot of opinion studies of minority groups and others, that something exists that I call the 1/3 rule. If you interview people about their opinions on a range of issues and ask them to compare themselves with each other, 1/3 will be to the left, 1/3 will be moderate, and 1/3 will be on the right, which is pretty comparable to your observations. And I'm wondering if you looked in any other way to reevaluate their responses. They self-identify in this way. One of the ways that it occurs to me might be useful to look at, and you may comment, is if you separated those in your survey who were in heavily minority communities from those in your survey who had no one to compare themselves with except those who were not in the minority communities, and what were the attitude differences?
Mm-hmm.
That's a great question.
I'm sorry. We actually, this is a very good suggestion for further analysis, which we have not had the opportunity to do yet, because this is indeed a very complicated survey. Carol would say that not only that the design was actually to try to be able to represent the national population of non-white elected officials in the offices that we specify. And also we also need to take care of the situation when this is a very extremely dispersed and skewed distributed population, that some population groups, such as, I say, Asian American, county woman, and there's actually none in the population. So we cannot really assume that there's some kind of even this normally distributed population for us to design a survey. So just try to overcome this methodological problem, and then to try to clean up the data takes a lot of work. And so therefore, I would say that would be a good suggestion for further analysis. I would assume that you will definitely be right. Context does matter, and fortunately, we also have attached to the individual opinion survey a huge number of, mostly based on the census information, but also other political variable as well, that we can actually do the kind of analysis that you suggest.
We actually do have, and I don't know if we can get it to you right this minute, but we were just talking earlier today about the percentage of the elected officials who come from majority minority districts. I don't know if we actually have that. We might be able to get that from Paige before you leave today. I'm not sure, but weren't we just talking about that a little bit ago? Do we have the numbers?
Over lunch.
Over lunch? Of the percent that come from a majority minority district?
I think we were talking about when we did the analysis, which is actually a publication that you will see in the website. It's on the voting rights. And Christine actually mentioned that at the congressional level, actually 100% of Latino congresspersons, they all come from majority Latino district, actually.
But Dr. Morris, to answer your question, that we do intend to look at that. We do have, as best we can, match either district level demographic data with who these folks are and hence who they represent, or in the case we can't really make it nice and neat, census data. And so we will be looking into that.
And one of the papers, it's the one that says descriptive representation, is on our website. That's the one you've got in your hand. That has a lot of, I think it does have majority minority districts in there, and if it doesn't, we can get you the information.
There was a question with the woman next to you. Yes.
Yes. My name is Mary Mullen. I was wanting to ask Miss Ervin. I didn't know if she was going to be answering any questions about the labor college she spoke about, or that she worked at, or if she could tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. The National Labor College is located in Silver Spring, Maryland, and it used to be known as the George Meany Center for Labor Studies until it, about 6 years ago, got nationally accredited to be a degree completion institution. And so many students come to the Labor College to complete college degrees that were started in other institutions. And so we have lots of partnerships. I don't work there anymore. They have lots of partnerships with colleges in the area, University of Baltimore, University of Maryland, and other institutions. And it's designed for members of unions. So it was closely affiliated with the AFL-CIO, and I'm not quite sure where that stands right now, but that's how it used to be. And I haven't been there for a while, so. You can get a whole lot of different kinds of degrees. I got a degree in labor studies, which they still have. Then they have some very technical kind of degrees that I couldn't even begin to tell you what they were. But they have a great website. You can go to it. It's nationallaborcollege.edu.
Professor Pinderhughes would like to add some comments.
Yeah, following up on Valerie Ervin's comments about income as a public official, we have data on that. 69% of all of our elected officials reported that they received an annual salary, but the other 30% don't. Of those who said yes, they earned income, 54% was less than $10,000. 27% was either $10,000 to less than $20,000 per year. And of those who said no, that they didn't receive an annual salary, do you receive any compensation at all? 51% of those said no. So your point is extremely well taken. I thought it would be useful to use our data.
Yes, in front, Dr. Strom.
Thank you. Thank you so much, all of you. That's totally fascinating, and it is clear that your website is just going to be a major tool for everybody working in this area for a long, long time to come. I just can't possibly overstate the value of it. I think you've done spectacular work. And I also want to thank our two public officials for joining us today. It was really great to hear from you. Question for you on the percentages you gave of minority officials and their attitudes towards various issues. Have you any sense of how those numbers do or do not reflect the attitudes of the populations who have elected them to office?
Okay. I think that actually is a weighting issue, which we actually spend about more than.
I don't think she means that. I think she means, you mean that, for example, are you asking whether, for example, on the immigration, do they
Represent which population?
represent the same? Do they hold the same opinions?
Public opinion.
One of the things, I don't know if you saw the USA Today article on our study today, but we revealed to the reporter that I think the most recent poll on the Iraq War was that 58% or something of the population as a whole is against the war, but our elected officials, I think it was something like 80% were against the war. So that's an example. I think also on immigration, was it, or on we have some fact sheets. No Child Left Behind. Yes. Right. Do you want to say something?
It's about reflecting the U.S. public.
Is that what you're asking, though? Is how do our elected officials compare to the
US
population
public?
views?
The populations
They represent.
Right.
We have data on that.
Yeah. We do have data on that, but in terms of comparing it to the overall population, we also have some of that.
Right.
With regards to the immigrant-related issues, we have not yet written up an assessment of the match with, at least in terms of Latino populations, but we do have, like the Pew Hispanic Center has done important surveys of the Latino population on various aspects of immigration. And so we want to take a look, at least at the general display of Latino general opinion, and look at our elected officials. But one thing that they do sustain in a way is a pattern of Latinos being very much highly supportive of bilingual education or various multilingual instructions, dual language programs. And so in that regard, they're very much a reflection of that grounded opinion. But on some of the other issues, they probably differ a bit. And I was actually surprised, even though a majority of the Latino public officials in our study did not support the idea of providing voting rights in school board elections to non-citizen legal immigrants with children in the public schools, a near majority did. And actually, that was found across the groups. And so I don't know that question has been asked of general Latino public opinion, but it seemed to me that certainly given the climate of American politics right now, which has, I think, a very restrictionist mood across the country, that I think that's a rather surprising finding. Certainly, we also know that certain states and certain locales, particular locales across the country, a few, are actually providing non-citizen voting opportunities in school board elections. So it is a phenomenon already taking place in this country, but I would imagine it's quite controversial, because one of the things that people say comes with citizenship is the right to vote. And whatever color you are, that's a very fundamental belief in American politics. Yes.
Hi, my name is Brianna Webster Patterson. I work with Families USA. We're a healthcare advocacy organization here in D.C. And I was just wondering, besides abortion, what other type of healthcare questions did you ask the elected officials in your survey?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm trying to think. Well, we did ask what's the most important issue, and we found that it was healthcare was tied sort of with the third most important issue. For example, it was education, employment and wages, and then there was this tier of 19 to 20% that was public safety, healthcare, development, things like that. So we did ask about that. We also, I have to look and think about that, but do we have any other?
No, we have a battery of the positions, but I do not think we make too much. We have, because our concentration are mostly on minority influenced issues that we believe.
Well, actually, that's actually a very interesting question, because some of the healthcare issues that affect minority communities are certainly, certain healthcare issues affect minority communities to a greater extent than non-minority communities. So I can see your point. I think the one answer also is that most surveys of what are called, of people who are not the general public, are limited in time to, say, 20 to 30 minutes. It's very hard to conduct a survey beyond 20, 30 minutes. Our survey average was 44 minutes, and some went on much longer. So we worked for 2 years to have enough questions that we had to ask. Some questions that we wanted to ask could not be included. So I know there's so many questions that people might be interested in having us ask, and we hope that this study might be replicated someday, and I think healthcare might be something that would be of very importance. For example, on insurance issues, things like that, and the provision of healthcare, diversity of the health disparities issues, things like that. But we really had a very long survey. I mean, it went on like, 68 pages, 195 questions. 168 questions.
No, 195 questions.
Okay. We can't even count them. There were so many.
A whole bunch of questions in any event.
Yes, we have 800 variables. So we know we couldn't cover everything, and that may be one thing that we weren't able to include.
So in a sense, what we did was we let the officials say what was important. Healthcare as a generic category was the way it was answered, but we didn't identify a set of healthcare questions.
There's also motivation.
But it was around the tier of third most important issues.
They also mentioned healthcare. In some of them mentioned that is why they are running for office, because they want to take care of that problem.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I have not a question, but a comment that comes from Ms. Navarro's presentation. I heard you mention, and also in the results, it was mentioned the challenges to child rearing women political leaders, and I heard Ms. Navarro say, you ask yourself, am I doing the right thing? Of course, it's a personal issue, I'm sure, for every child rearing elected official, but I hope you never lose sight of the fact of the example that you are setting, not only for your own girls and for young men as well, but for the whole society in setting these examples of women of color in leadership positions, in political leadership positions. It's very valuable for the entire society and for kids in particular.
I'm sure they're very proud of you.
Yes, ma'am.
So I just have another question. Did you say you did affirmative action or not? I would be really interested in what affirmative action.
Yes, we
did.
Can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Well, one general comment is what we find in voting rights, the minority-oriented issue here, we find that there's actually overwhelming support for either in terms of answering question on the importance of affirmative action in general as a principle, but also affirmative action to their own personal benefit, whether or not they get a job or get an education because of affirmative action. So we have that type of question as well. But basically, we find overwhelming support. You can say this is across all the racial group. Again, Asian tend to be slightly lower, but still 8 out of 10 would say that. So that's still overwhelmingly high consent. You can say this is a consensus issue here in terms of just how important this issue, in particular policy, would be to their personal, public and personal life.
Dr. Falcon.
I was wondering how you handle the issue of parity. What these numbers mean in terms of, either population or voting age population, and is that something that you also have on the database
What exactly do you mean in terms of parity of elected officials in comparison to population?
Population or voting age population, just to get a sense of what
we
the
actually
proportions
have done that. I believe it's not in the. It's in one of our papers. I think the publication. The publication actually, yes, it's in the. Dr. Morgan's left, but it's in the Journal of Women, Politics and Policy, a special issue on intersectionality and politics, and in one of the articles that we co-authored, there is parity mostly at the congressional level for black women. Black women have achieved parity at the congressional level to their population. All other groups are still below parity. I think state legislators, women of color, I think black women are approaching the same parity level as white women.
No.
No?
Yeah.
I have to look at the table again. We'll have to get back to you. The one thing is, as I said, that women of color do make up a larger proportion of elected officials of color than white women do of white elected officials. We don't know why at this point, because we'd have to study candidates to see it, because we've actually surveyed the winners, the one who won office. But that is a puzzle. They haven't achieved parity in terms of their population, but they do. There's two ways of looking at it.
I believe also one of our conference papers at APSA that's posted on the website, we also did look at areas where black elected officials and Hispanic elected officials and Asians are concentrated. And I do believe we looked at state level data and then looked at representation in the state legislatures and broke that out by gender, I believe.
Right, and county as well.
Right.
We look at how many counties that these elected officials are actually shared. You can find the significant portion of them in the counties, and I think California is probably one state that we can find some similarity.
You know,
but, please.
That's another really interesting thing that jumped out at us. When we were gathering our data and looking at those maps, that was one of the first things that we did, was when we actually mapped those geographical distributions. We found two things. There's still quite a bit of dispersion of our groups in different parts of the country. And so hence one wonders, what are the prospects for coalition? Because if they still don't know each other or don't live next to each other or don't govern together, what are we really talking about? And so we decided to also look. We know that also these communities are also merging more and more in American society. So we also then looked at, okay, let's look at where they do coexist, where they do govern together. And we did produce a list of counties where at least two of the groups were a fairly significant percentage of the population where these folks are governing. So it would be nice, and at some point in the future we want to take a look at that. But that really is where the nitty-gritty of coalition building must take place. So just in the geographical dispersion and concentration issue, I think we're raising some questions about this notion of multicultural governance. Yes.
I'd like to just add, I think if you're interested in some of these issues, our papers on the website do have a lot of those answers. We don't, because we have so much data, so many pieces of data, we can't keep all of it in our minds at once, but they are all on the paper. So the parity issue is definitely up on the website.
And I think that last point is we looked at when we were first analyzing the database. We haven't yet gone back and looked at the survey data using those same county comparisons. So that's another reminder of something we should do.
We do have questions to our elected officials about their perceptions of who they represent. And some of that is what are the characteristics of their constituents, including what percentage of their constituents are immigrant. And a number of other things. So it'll be interesting to compare what they think, who they think they represent, with who the U.S. Census says they represent, or voting political data.
Right, particularly racial and ethnic makeup.
Exactly. So we have the official census and what they say their district looks like. So we haven't analyzed that yet, but I
think the initial indication is actually they were quite accurate.
I'm sure they are.
They're good politicians.
I had a question about, I was wondering if in your survey you included any questions that dealt with future aspirations. Do most of them at the local level, for example, expect to go to the state legislature and from there to Congress?
Right.
We did find that the ambition question of do you expect to run for higher office, and I see Paige Ransford is looking that answer up as we speak through our clever index of the questions. Does anyone have
actually, I think
it's relatively low.
The surprising finding is actually the most local elected official doesn't really have a plan to want to go up, whereas the state legislators actually have a much higher percentage of them actually would indicate that they actually have an ambition to want to seeking a higher level of office. And also there's gender differences as well.
But one of the things I think we need to think about this in terms of the multiple paths to office idea is, and you spoke to this, that there is a sense that a qualitative research or what people tell you is that women tend to sort of come into it because of a concern, or even an elected officials of color who are men also said they sort of came into a concern. The idea of ambition as being, I want to get ahead, may be a traditional view of what ambition, political ambition means. And so just asking, do you want to run for a higher office, may not capture what ambition means. We may have to begin to develop new questions to capture the really complex reasons why people run, why they may run later. I mean, we've just heard so many stories like yours and the people I've studied in Massachusetts and elsewhere where I didn't plan on doing this, but I felt I had to. And I responded to a need. And so the motivation to run question really shows that, that I did this because I sort of had to. And we're going to tease out whether there are gender differences in that area or racial differences, but basically we may need to rethink the concept of what political ambition means, and you can't use just do you plan to run for higher office someday?
Mm-hmm. And whether it's a valuable thing or not, why is it better to have a higher office seeking? Maybe it's good, but then actually satisfy their own need to want to serve the community by staying at the local level with the community. Yeah.
And I remember that some of the answers seem to be, no, I had no plans to go further. In fact, this is fine, and I'm not going to do anything else. Although I suspect that a lot of those people will find themselves in the situations that our public officials describe for us today.
One of the women I interviewed a long time ago in Lawrence, Massachusetts, who was a community activist, I interviewed her around her activism, and she said, I will never run for office. She then ran for mayor of the city of Lawrence, which is has 60% non-white, and she came within 600 votes of becoming mayor of the city of Lawrence 2 years later.
Yes, on the back.
My name is Monica Villalta. I am in public health, and I think you may have been talking about the question that I have in mind, or maybe you have mentioned it before I came to the room. But I wonder if you can give us, if the survey could give us any insight into how women and women of color define leadership differently. And then which pathways were more effective for women and individuals of color to achieve leadership. And I think you may have mentioned something about the map, but if I missed the question, my apologies. And what role in that pathway did mentoring take?
We do have some questions about, one of the things I'll quickly answer is we do have some questions about style of governance and looking at how they think men operate, whether they are, or women operate, and whether they perceive, to what extent do they perceive them as consensus builders or actually trying to stay in the spotlight or take the spotlight. I can't remember exactly how those questions, but we have a number of questions that kind of deal with the style of governance, but we haven't analyzed those yet.
So stay tuned.
And also, we did ask our elected officials about the type of representation that they provide. In a sense, the classic dichotomy in American politics is whether they enact or implement the wishes of their delegates very closely, if that's what they take as their cue, or do they exercise a fair amount of discretion and hoping that in drawing on their own expertise and then hope that their constituents trust how they govern. And it was actually the latter, the trustee notion of representation, that I think most of them said that they engage in. And some of that may be that they also may simply feel comfortable with their relationship with constituents, but we're not sure exactly about that. But that's the best I can come off the top of my head in terms of what we have.
Question number 104, female elected officials work harder than their male counterparts. And I figured I'd give you the male and female views on this. In terms of agree or strongly agree, 68% of women said yes, and 37% of men said yes.
So there's a gender gap there. Any other questions? Okay, we'll take a couple more.
I wonder how some of the delegates deal with the language problems that arise with people in their constituency.
Well, one of the questions that we did ask was, do you provide language materials in languages other than English if you have constituents who speak another language in your district? And I believe you have the data.
Up to 1/3. We actually didn't really specify whether or not you need to have a percentage of language deficiency constituents. We just say whether or not you provide bilingual material, and we find out that actually up to 1/3 would say yes, they did.
When they have people in their district who...
We don't have that condition. We didn't even say that.
And I believe most of those were Latino elected officials.
Yes, Latinos have even higher percentage.
Only about 17% of African Americans said they provided materials.
I was wondering, in terms of the survey, whether you were able to look at elected officials that come from quote-unquote safe districts versus other districts, and whether that had an impact in terms of their attitudes. Because, there's some literature that says in the safe districts they go crazy and they get real liberal and become socialist and stuff like that.
We haven't done that yet.
Oh, okay.
We do have some measures of ideology that we're inputting now in terms of the states, but we haven't quite got to that point of analysis.
We did have a question.
Good question.
Yeah, we do have a question on whether or not how much is the percentage winning margin, and we find most of them are actually from the safe ones. Either they have no challenge, or they have a very higher degree, large degree of winning margin. So in that sense, most of them are actually not really considered important to catering the diverse need for the community. They can just. That's kind of echoing what you say about the perception of what the leadership side. They are more like, people trust me, and I can use my own judgment to try to exercise in my position for you, to vote for you in the what I believe is to your best interest.
Any other questions? This has been quite delightful. Again, we would like to thank U.S. Studies Program and Dr. Strum for hosting us, and very much thank you all for your attention, and we would again like to extend our deepest appreciation for our elected officials who joined us here today. Thank you all very much.
Well, these ladies are great.